Orchestrated original memoir story, avoiding forbidden names. Refined financial betrayal narrative. Orchestrated original memoir story, avoiding forbidden names. Refined financial betrayal narrative. My pickup wasn't even in park before I saw them. The two of them planted in the carport with their arms crossed, and I felt the last 3 years settle on me like a wet coat. It was a Tuesday. I'd gone to the pharmacy and then to the credit union and then to a diner where I sat alone with a cup of coffee for almost an hour, just looking out the window at the parking lot, working up to coming home. So I was already raw when I pulled into the driveway and the motion lights snapped on, and there they were, my wife and her daughter, waiting for me like a welcoming committee that had come to collect a debt. My wife didn't wait for me to cut the engine. She was at my door before I had it open. "What did you do?" she said, and her voice had a crack in it. I hadn't purred in years, the kind of crack that comes from real fear and not the performed kind. The card was declined at the gas station. Then I tried the ATM and it said insufficient funds, and I almost passed out right there in the lobby. People were looking at me. "What did you do?" Her daughter stood a few feet back with a phone in her hand, thumb scrolling, like the money might reappear if she refreshed enough times. "Everything's gone," she said. "There's nothing in the account. You emptied it." I set my keys in my coat pocket. I'd practiced what I was going to say in the diner, mouthing it into my coffee like a crazy person, and now that it was time the words came out flatter and steadier than I expected. "I opened a new account," I said. "This morning I moved my pension and my Social Security into it. The old account's still there. It's just got your money in it now, not mine." For a second, neither of them said anything. My wife's mouth opened and then closed. The color went out of her face in a way I'd never seen, like somebody pulling a plug. Her daughter stopped scrolling. The only sound was the furnace kicking on in the basement, that low thump it makes, the furnace I'd replaced myself 2 winters ago lying on my back in 3 inches of crawl space water. Then it came apart all at once. "You can't do that," her daughter said. "We have bills. We have the car payment. We have—" "Your car payment," I said. "Our bills," my wife said, but her eyes weren't on the bills. Her eyes were on me, scanning my face the way she always did when she needed to find the soft spot, the give, the place where I'd fold. For 3 years she'd always found it. I could see her looking for it now and not finding it, and I watched something close behind her eyes when she understood it wasn't there anymore. I went past them both and unlocked the front door and went inside, and they followed me. Of course they did, talking over each other the whole way. 3 years ago I would have apologized. I want to be honest about that. 3 years ago I'd have stood in that carport and said I was sorry. I should have talked to her first. I overreacted. Let's sit down and figure this out together. I'd have handed it all back just to make the noise stop. But something had come loose in me that morning at the credit union, sitting in a chair that was bolted to the floor, reading 2 years of statements 1 line at a time, and I wasn't the same man who'd left the house that day. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the backup. I was 62 when I married her. I'd buried my first wife 11 months before that. 41 years we'd been married, and then a stroke took her on a Sunday morning between church and lunch, just like that. And the house went so quiet I started leaving the television on all night just to hear voices. My kids were grown and out of state, one in Charlotte, one in Phoenix, both with their own lives, both calling on Sundays out of love and obligation in equal measure. I was a machinist for 38 years, tool and die. The kind of work where you can read a part with your fingers in the dark. My hands knew that shop better than they knew anything. But the shop closed when I was 59, the way they all did around here, and I picked up part-time work at a smaller place to fill the days and the pension, and mostly I was alone. So when I met her, I wasn't looking for love so much as I was looking for the sound of another person in the house. She was warm. That's the word everybody used about her. Warm. She laughed at my jokes, the bad ones too. She brought a casserole to my first wife's memorial because a mutual friend had asked her to, and she stayed afterward and helped wash dishes. And I remember standing in my own kitchen watching a woman dry my plates and thinking maybe the quiet didn't have to be permanent. Her daughter came with her. I knew that going in. The daughter was 26, married already to a fellow I'll call her husband because I never could make myself like saying his name. They were between places, my wife told me. Between jobs, between leases, between whatever it is people are always between when they don't want to use the word stuck. It was supposed to be temporary. They'd move into the spare bedroom and the den just until the husband's business got going. He had a thing he was doing with cars, buying and flipping, and then it was a thing with crypto, and then it was a thing with sports betting that he swore wasn't gambling because he had a system. My wife squeezed my hand across the table the first night we talked about it and said, 6 weeks, tops, they just need a soft place to land. I believed her. I wanted to be the kind of man who gives people a soft place to land. The first compromise was the smallest one. She offered to take over the bills. I was happy to hand them off, frankly. I'd been a widower paying my own utilities for almost a year, and I was tired of it. The envelopes, the due dates, the little anxieties. She was organized, she said. She'd set everything up online and I'd never have to think about it again. So I gave her the login. I gave her access to the checking account and the savings, and I added her name to the card. And I told myself, this is what married people do. This is what trust looks like. You don't keep separate books from your own wife. The second compromise was the home equity line. She brought it up on a winter evening, the kind where it gets dark at 5 and you feel like the day cheated you. The roof needs work, she said, and the kitchen's from the 80s, and rates are good right now. And a HELOC is basically free money if you're smart about it. Her husband nodded along. He was always nodding along when money was being discussed, like a man at the racetrack who already knows which horse he's picked. I owned the house outright. I'd bought it in 1998, paid the mortgage off 2 years before I retired, every nail and joist of it mine, free and clear, and I'll tell you the truth. Signing that line of credit felt like undoing 30 years of work in an afternoon. My stomach turned when I signed it, but I'd learned by then that my stomach churning was something to talk myself out of, not something to listen to. We never did the roof, we never did the kitchen. After that, my money turned into a rumor. I'd ask how we were doing and she'd say, fine, handled, don't worry about it. I'd notice a withdrawal and she'd say it was the insurance. The husband would come home with a leased SUV, one of those big ones with the third row nobody sat in, and she'd say he got a deal, he needed it for the business. There was a cruise, the two of them, my wife and her daughter, a week in the Caribbean, mother-daughter time she called it, and I stayed home because somebody had to watch the house, and I told myself I didn't like boats anyway. They posted pictures. I saw the deck, the drinks with the little umbrellas, the sunset. I saw the charge a month later when I happened to glance at a statement she'd left on the counter. $2,200 for the room alone. When I asked, she got quiet and hurt and said, "You make me feel like a criminal for taking one trip in 3 years. Do you not trust me?" And I backed down. I always back down. The thing I keep coming back to is the word our. Somewhere in those 3 years, everything I owned became ours. Our account, our house, our bills. The husband called it our place once, standing in my living room in his socks, and a cold feeling went down my spine, because it was not our place. It was the place I'd carried to the trash on garbage night for 25 years, the place where my first wife had died on a Sunday morning, the place with my whole life sunk into the studs. But I didn't correct him. You learn not to correct people when you decided peace is more important than the truth. What finally cracked it was the pharmacy. I take a pill for blood pressure and a pill for cholesterol. Nothing dramatic. The standard middle-of-the-night old man inventory. I stopped to pick up a refill and the card got declined. Just like that, in front of the pharmacy tech, a kid maybe 20 years old, who very kindly pretended not to notice while I stood there feeling my face go hot. I told her never mind, I'd come back. And I sat in my truck in the parking lot, and I didn't understand it, because there should have been plenty in that account. There was always supposed to be plenty. That night I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water, and the husband's phone lit up on the counter where he'd left it charging. I'm not a snoop, I want that on the record. But it lit up right in front of me, and I saw the bank alert across the top of the screen, the kind you get when money moves, and it said a transfer had gone through. The time on it was 1043 in the morning, the night before. $900. Out. I stood there with my glass of water, and something in my chest went very still and very cold, and for the first time in 3 years I stopped talking myself out of the feeling. The next morning I drove to the credit union before they opened and waited in the lot until a young woman named Delia unlocked the door. I asked for 2 years of statements, printed, all of it. She brought me to a desk, and I sat down and I read every line, and Delia sat across from me and didn't say much, just refilled my little paper cup of water twice, and I think she'd seen this before. The old man and the statements, because she had a way of being gentle that you only get from practice. Here is what I found. Sportsbook deposits. Dozens of them. The husband had a betting app, and he'd been feeding it for over a year. 50 here, 200 there, a $400 Sunday in the fall when the football was on. There were transfers to a crypto exchange, in and out, mostly out, the money going somewhere and never coming back. There was the cruise, there was the SUV, the lease payments draining out every month like a slow wound. There was a furniture store, an electronics store, a jeweler in the mall, a thing called a wellness membership that ran $90 a month and that nobody in the house had ever once mentioned. The HELOC, my home equity line, the thing I'd signed with my stomach turning, was drawn down to $48,000, drawn against my house, the house with my name on it alone. All told, between the line of credit and the savings I'd built one careful decade at a time, the number came to $51,300 and change. That's not a rough patch. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern, and a pattern has a hand behind it, and I sat in that bolted chair and finally let myself understand whose hands they were. I had Delia open me a new account that morning, a separate bank actually, not even the same building, and I redirected my pension and my Social Security into it effective immediately. I froze the HELOC so not another dollar could come off my house. I took my wife off the card. I asked Delia, just so I understood the damage, whether I was on the hook for the line of credit, and she told me gently that yes, my house secured it. That part was mine to clean up. I thanked her. Then I drove to the diner and drank coffee for an hour, working up the nerve to come home and become a man my wife didn't recognize. So that's how I ended up in my own living room that Tuesday night, the two of them following me from room to room. "You went behind my back," my wife said. "We're married. You don't make a decision like that without talking to me." "For 3 years," I said. "I didn't get to talk about my own paycheck. I'm not going to apologize for talking about it now." The husband came down the stairs then. He'd been up there listening, I could tell, and he came down with his chin out, ready to fight. "You think you can just cut everybody off?" he said. "You live here too. You eat the food. You think the lights pay for themselves?" I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at the watch on his wrist that cost more than my truck was worth, and the sneakers he wore in the house, and the soft hands that had never once held a tool, and I felt the old urge to keep the peace rise up in me, and I let it pass. "This house was paid off before you ever set foot in it," I said. "The lights were on in here a long time before you knew the address." "Stop it," my wife snapped at him, and then she turned back to me and softened her voice, which was always the more dangerous register. "Honey, we built a system together. You can't just blow it up because you're upset." "I'm not upset," I said, and I wasn't. That was the strange part, the part that scared her more than yelling would have. "I'm done. There's a difference." I want to tell you about the rest of that night because it's the part the easy version of this story leaves out. I didn't throw them out into the dark. I want to be clear about that, because I've had a lot of time since to think about who I am, and I'm not a man who puts his wife's grandchildren. There were no grandchildren, but you understand what I mean, out on the street in February. What I did was sit them down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd first squeezed my hand and said 6 weeks, tops, and I laid it out plain. I told them I'd found the statements. I put the folder on the table. The husband wouldn't touch it, but the daughter picked it up, and I watched her eyes go down the columns, the sports book, the crypto, the cash withdrawals at 1 and 2 in the morning, and her breathing changed. "You're making it look worse than it is," she said, "which is what people say when it's exactly that bad." "Then explain it to me," I said. "I've got all night." The husband couldn't help himself. "Some of those bets were going to hit," he said. "I had a system. One good Sunday and we'd have cleared the whole thing. I was trying to get us out, not dig us in deeper." He actually believed it. That's the thing about men like him. They aren't lying to you, they're lying to themselves first, and you just happen to be standing nearby. "With whose money?" I said. He didn't answer. And then it came. The thing I'll never unhear. The two of them started in on each other the way people do when the truth's been cornered and there's nowhere left for it to go. The daughter turned on him. "You kept raising the limit. You said the next one would hit." He turned on her. "You're the one who told me he never checks the statements. You said he wouldn't notice." And my wife, who'd been standing by the counter very still, said low and sharp, "Both of you shut up." But it was out. "You said he wouldn't notice." I looked at my wife. She was already looking at the floor. "You knew?" I said. "That's not," she started. "You knew the whole time." Not a question now. "You handled the bills so I wouldn't see. You told him I wouldn't notice." Nobody said anything. The furnace thumped in the basement. The husband ran both his soft hands through his hair, and the daughter put the folder down very carefully like it might go off. And my wife kept her eyes on a spot on the linoleum, and that silence told me everything. The statements hadn't. I'd spent 38 years standing at a machine. I'd come home with metal shavings in the cuffs of my pants and grease worked so deep into my knuckles it never fully came out, not even on Sundays. I'd worked through a bad back and a worse shoulder, and a winter when the plant cut the heat to save money and we all wore gloves at the lathes. And for 3 years, all of that, every hour of it, had been turned into a checking account that 2 grown adults dipped into at 2 in the morning to chase a parlay. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, and my voice was so steady it surprised even me. "I'm not going to keep funding this. That part's over and it's not coming back. But I'm not going to leave you with nothing either, because whatever your mother and I were, we were married, and I keep my word even when other people don't." I told them I'd cover the apartment deposit. First and last month's rent, one time, my money, a clean start. After that, they were on their own. I told the husband he needed a job, a real one, the kind with a name badge and a schedule, and that if he couldn't manage, that he had no business living in a house at all, let alone mine. I told my wife I'd be filing, and that I wasn't doing it out of hate. I was doing it because I finally understood that staying would cost me the last thing I had left worth keeping, which was my own respect for myself. The husband stood up so fast his chair scraped. "This isn't over," he said, and he grabbed his jacket and went out the front door and didn't slam it, which somehow was worse, and he didn't come back that night or the next. My wife stayed at the table a long time after the daughter went upstairs. "You're going to break this family apart," she said finally, very quietly. "I thought about that. I thought about my father, who worked the line at a stamping plant for 40 years and never once raised his voice about money, who taught me that family means you protect each other, not that you take from each other until there's nothing left. I thought about the word she'd used, family, and how she'd used it like a crowbar. This family broke a long time ago," I said. "I just finally stopped pretending I didn't see the crack. They were gone in 11 days. I want to be careful about the next part because I know how these stories like to end, with the door slamming and the man standing tall and the music swelling. Real life isn't that clean. I did change the locks. The morning after they left, I called a locksmith, a heavy-set fellow named Sal who'd done my shop 20 years back, and he rekeyed the whole house and the garage and shook my hand and didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. I went and saw a lawyer, too, a sharp woman named Ms. Reyes, who laid it all out without sugarcoating. The HELOC was mine to deal with, because the house secured it. The divorce would be straightforward since there were no kids between us, and the co-signed car loan, which I'd forgotten I'd even signed 2 years back in a moment of weakness, was going to follow me whether the husband paid it or not. So no, there was no magic. I protected the future, but the past had a price tag, and I paid it. $48,000 on the line of credit. I refinanced the house at 65 years old, took on a payment I thought I'd never have again, and I made my peace with it, because a payment I could see was better than a wound I couldn't. Here's the part nobody tells you. The first month alone in that house, after 3 years of noise, the quiet came back, and it scared me. I'd gotten the quiet I thought I wanted, and it sat on my chest at night. I'd lie there and do the math. The $48,000 to refinance the years I'd lost, and I'd think, you old fool, you saw every red flag and you waved at it. The 80-inch television that appeared one day, the sneakers, the SUV nobody needed, the cruise, any one of them should have been enough. People in my situation always say they didn't see it coming, and it isn't true, not for me. I saw it. I just decided over and over that seeing it would cost me more than not seeing it. That's a harder thing to forgive yourself for than being fooled. But the quiet changed. It took a few months, but it changed. I painted the living room. My first wife had always wanted it, a soft gray, and I'd always said no, too much trouble, and now there was nobody to argue with. So I did it. 2 coats on a ladder. I was a little too old to be on. I cleaned out the garage and found my father's old toolbox under a tarp where the husband had buried it to make room for his junk, and I set it back up on the bench where it belonged. I started going to a Saturday breakfast at the diner with a few other men from the old shop, retired now like me, and we'd sit there for 2 hours over eggs and talk about nothing, about the Browns, about our knees, about whose kid moved away, and I'd come home lighter than when I left. I fixed the gutter I'd been ignoring. I planted tomatoes in the spring, more than one man could ever eat, and gave the extras to Sal and to the breakfast crowd, and to Delia at the credit union, who laughed and said she'd never gotten a tomato from a customer before. It's strange what you notice when your life stops running on somebody else's emergency. It was about 7 months after they left that my wife came back to the door. I knew her knock. That's the way a person knocks when some part of them still thinks they have the right to come in, and I heard it, and I knew before I opened the door. She looked thinner. The expensive handbag was gone. The sharp makeup was gone. Just jeans and a coat I recognized, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept right in a long time. "Hi," she said. "Hi." We stood there. Neither of us knew the right distance anymore. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, and then I stepped aside, because I'm not made of stone and never wanted to be. She walked into the gray living room and stopped. "You painted it," she said. "She wanted it this color. You told me once she wanted it gray." "She did," I said. I made coffee, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and we sat at opposite ends of the couch where 100 arguments had happened, and she told me. The husband and the daughter had split up 4 months back. The betting had never stopped. If anything, it got worse once there was no one else's money to cushion it, and the daughter finally saw what I'd been looking at across that kitchen table, the pattern with a hand behind it, and she got out. He'd left town owing people the kind of money you don't want to owe. My wife had hit the bottom of it. She was working 2 jobs now, a cashier shift and a cleaning job, at an age when she'd thought she was done working. "I'm not here for money," she said quickly, before I could even wonder. "I know how it looks, me showing up. I'm not asking for anything. I just—" She stopped. I owe you an apology, and I didn't want to die someday having never said it to your face. I waited. I'd learned to wait. I knew, she said. I knew it was bad, and I knew it was your money. And I let it happen because I was scared. Scared of him leaving, scared of her hating me, scared of being alone again at my age. So I chose the easy thing. I chose to keep using you because you were strong, and you never complained, and I told myself you could carry it. I never once asked if you should have to. Her voice broke on that. That's the part I can't get past. I never asked if you should have to. I looked at her for a long time. There was no angle in her face this time, no scanning for the soft spot, just a tired woman telling the truth too late, which is still better than never telling it at all. I appreciate you saying it, I said, and I did. I don't expect anything, she said. Not forgiveness, not today. I just didn't want the last thing between us to be that night in the kitchen. We talked for almost an hour. Not about the money, not about the husband, just about life, her apartment, the bus she takes to the cleaning job, the way her knees ache now the same way mine do. When she stood to leave, she stopped at the door and looked at me. You seem lighter, she said. I am, I said. She gave a small smile, the first real one I'd seen from her in years. I hope you find somebody who appreciates that. I didn't answer because appreciation wasn't what I'd been after. I'd had appreciation. It turned out to be the rope they tied me with. What I'd gone looking for, without even knowing it, was the right to wake up in my own house and not owe anybody an explanation for it. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her walk down the driveway to the bus stop on the corner, and I didn't feel triumphant, and I didn't feel bitter. I felt the way you feel when a long fever finally breaks. Some marriages aren't built to survive the truth, but some people can actually grow out of the wreckage of one. And watching her get smaller down the block, I let myself hope she'd be one of them. That evening I sat on the back step with a cup of coffee and watched the light go orange over the tomato plants, and I thought about the man I'd been 3 years before, the one who handed over the login, who signed the line of credit with his stomach turning, who let another man call his house our place and said nothing. That man believed peace meant keeping quiet. He believed love meant never saying no. He believed that if he just gave enough, the giving would finally be enough. He's not the one sitting on this step. This one learned a harder thing, and I'll tell it to you straight in case you need to hear it the way I needed to hear it. Boundaries are not betrayal. Saying no to people you love is not cruelty. And the day you finally protect what you spent your whole life building, your money, your house, the quiet you earned, you'll find out that the people who called you selfish for it were the ones living off your silence the whole time. I don't know what comes next. I'm 65 with a mortgage I didn't expect, and a divorce I never wanted, and a list of repairs longer than my arm. But I know this much. Tonight, the house is mine. The locks are mine. The name on the deed is mine and only mine, the way it was before I let it become ours. And when the furnace thumps in the basement at 2 in the morning, it's the only thing in this house spending my money, and I find I can sleep just fine to the sound of it. It took me 65 years to learn that the most expensive thing I ever owned wasn't the house or the pension. It was my own habit of looking away. Every time my card still worked, I let myself believe the numbers were fine. Every time my wife said handled, don't worry about it, I chose the comfort of not knowing over the trouble of finding out. And that choice, made 100 small times, is what carried $51,000 out of my life, one late-night transfer at a time. Nobody robbed me in a single night. I gave it away in installments, and the receipt was 3 years long. What changed wasn't my luck. It was the morning I finally sat in that bolted chair at the credit union and read every line myself, instead of trusting somebody else to read it for me. Seeing clearly is its own kind of work. Her daughter called it making it look worse than it was. The son-in-law called it a system that was about to hit. But the page didn't argue, and it didn't flatter. It just told the truth, and the day I was willing to look at that truth without flinching was the day I stopped being easy to use. I think a lot now about the difference between being kind and being useful. For 3 years I confused the two. I thought handing over my login was kindness, that signing the line of credit was love, that never saying no made me a good man. It didn't. It made me a resource. Real decency, the kind my father had, sets a limit and keeps its word inside that limit. That's why I still covered their deposit on the way out the door. I wasn't going to let what they did to me turn me into a man who puts people out in the cold. You can hold a boundary and keep your honor at the same time. I had to get to 65 to understand that those two things aren't opposites. And then there was the part nobody claps for. Refinancing the house I'd already paid off. Taking on a mortgage again at an age when I thought I was finished with them. Lying awake doing the math, calling myself a fool, and getting up the next morning anyway to paint the living room gray and plant more tomatoes than one man could ever eat. Freedom didn't show up loud. It came in slow, the way the quiet in that house went from something that scared me to something I could finally sleep inside of. If you take one thing from what happened to me, take this. The gut feeling you keep talking yourself out of is usually right. The line you're afraid to draw is usually the one that saves you, and the strength you'll need in the end isn't the kind that wins an argument in a kitchen. It's the quieter kind that looks at the truth, keeps its word, and starts over on its own 2 feet, however late in the day it's gotten.